So I will just introduce the session quickly and then we will get started. I hope everyone's doing great. So this is the Recalling Freedom Summer session, and there's no better way to start the day and ground ourselves than with the folks in this room. So as you all know, this year marks the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer. Freedom Summer volunteers like Andrew Goodman started with intensive training in Ohio at what is now Miami University before heading to Mississippi to organize. Our trainings won't be as intense, but in a similar way, they are meant to prepare you for what you can do to protect our democracy and civil rights tomorrow, the next day, and for years to come. But what better way to begin than to hear from people who can speak to some of the incredible history of organizing and movement building in our country. So today we get to hear from two amazing people who I'm honored and humbled to even be in a room with. Each were part of Freedom Summer and the larger civil rights movement in different ways, and both lifelong activists. I thought about saying more, but the most important thing is that you all have time to hear directly from our speakers. So I'm just going to share small slices of their very impressive bios for context, and then we'll jump right into what I'm sure will be a powerful conversation. So Mr. Frank Figgers currently serves as a strategy consultant for One Voice. The mission of One Voice is to enhance civic engagement in the formation of public policy through leadership assistance for advocacy groups, associations, and community-based organizations. Mr. Figgers graduated from Tougaloo College in 1971 with a BA degree in sociology. He previously served as the Hinds County Election Commissioner, representing the people of the 3rd District, and was elected to 2 consecutive 4-year terms. He was the first person of African descent to be elected in that district to that position. Mr. Figgers currently serves on the board for the Young People Project of Jackson, Mississippi since 1998, and he also serves as vice chairman of the board of directors of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. And he's a lifelong resident of Jackson, Mississippi. Let me actually spotlight him so that you all can see him. You know what? I'm not seeing the ability to spotlight at the moment, so I'll do that afterwards once we start the conversation. Mr. Charles Person. In the summer of 1961, the Freedom Riders, a group of mostly young people, both Black and white, including Charles Person, risked their lives to challenge the system of segregation in interstate travel in the South. Mr. Person was the youngest Freedom Rider on the original Congress of Racial Equality Racial Equality, excuse me. A gifted math and physics student with aspirations to become a scientist, he was a member of his local NAACP Youth Council in high school. As a freshman at Morehouse College, Mr. Person became active in the civil rights movement, joining a student organization called the Atlanta Committee on Appeal for Human Rights, and was on the core Freedom Ride. Mr. Person published a book, Buses Are A-Comin', Memoir of a Freedom Rider, in 2021. So without further ado, I have some questions to ask to get things started so that you all can hear from them. And then hopefully we'll also have some time for you all to ask questions and chat. So keep those in mind as we go, and feel free to chime in the chat as we go as well. And I can try to elevate your comments. So first things first, I would love to ask you, Mr. Figgers, what was your experience of Freedom Summer as a kid?
Thank you, and thank you for that generous introduction, Ms. Smith. The experience that I had of Freedom Summer, being a 14-year-old young person in Jackson, Mississippi, seeing the buzz and hum of activity around me, and urged by my parents not to participate. I've come from a Christian home, raised in a Christian background, going to church, even went to a religious school. and I saw these young people that were participating, that was a buzz with energy. I saw them as the prophets of that day. I saw them as acting out what the Bible says and stands on around do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Uh, and I just thought that was just so natural. But even though my parents urged me not to participate, being a kind of rowdy fella, I sought ways to at least go to a freedom school. Now, the reason that they didn't want me to participate was because it was dangerous, dangerous times. Those young people were about making two Mississippis one Mississippi, or at least the Mississippi that we have today. And in doing that, Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, was entrenched on keeping things as close as possible to the two Mississippi system that had existed since 1861. The state of Mississippi was willing to do any and everything that it could to keep things the way that it had always been. And these young people stood in resistance of that and designing ways to break that two-tier, two Mississippi system. Now I can go on. I'm a narrative person.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so they sought ways to break it. It was dangerous from a resident of Mississippi's perspective because everybody knew that there was a Ku Klux Klan out there. And that was like a paramilitary organization that would use violence and intimidation to keep things the same. But then, in a general way, people knew that there was the Mississippi Citizens Council, which was a group of business people that were using more business tactics and approaches. Like if you were a carpenter, for instance, and participated in movement type activities, they would just call a hardware store and you couldn't buy hammers or nails or wood in order to ply your trade. But then there was in Mississippi also a state-funded taxpayer institution called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was a secret police type organization that would also exercise tactics and strategies to keep Mississippi closed society. They would do things like if you were at a meeting, you drove a car, for instance, somebody would write down your tag number and they'd go and run it. And if you wanted to be a barber or a beautician or work at a funeral home or anything that required a state license, they would deny that license. Or if you were a property owner, they would see that your property taxes went up and to a rate that you couldn't afford to pay. So people knew that kind of stuff was there. They may not could name it at the time, but they knew how tough Mississippi was. And so being in that atmosphere was the way it was in 1964. And I'll just close with that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Figures, for sharing that. And I think that's a great lead in as well to my question for Mr. Person, which is, can you tell us a bit more about how you decided to join the Freedom Rides and what that was like?
Well, I was in the Atlanta student movement, and after the demonstrations and marches and stuff, we were finally successful, and then we were able to negotiate with the businessmen, and they opened the lunch counters. They began to hire blacks in more meaningful jobs, and life was good. But then the Congress of Racial Equality and knew that throughout the country, there were a lot of students who had been trained in nonviolent passive resistance, and they needed bodies. So they sent out a call for people to join the Freedom Rides. Well, nobody knew what a Freedom Ride was in 1961. But if I had an opportunity to fight segregation at a higher level, I wanted to be there. So I volunteered, and for some reason, they chose me. It took me many, many, many years to find out why they selected me. And it was because I was so young. Didn't have any negatives in my background. I hadn't lived long enough to do anything derogatory. And they wanted everyone to be squeaky clean. And I guess I met that category at that particular time. It was a awakening for me because I got to meet some wonderful people who were really active in social disobedience. These are great men and women, and I learned an awful lot. I've gained a lot of respect for people throughout the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to briefly return to you, Mr. Figures. You are, as you mentioned, a lifelong resident and an activist of Mississippi. And, you know, this summit is all about recalling Freedom Summer and the Civil Rights Movement, but also looking at what the fight looks like today. So can you tell us a little bit about what community organizing in Mississippi looks like currently?
Yes. So today in Mississippi, significant victories were won and accomplished on the Mississippi stage of the civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the public education fight for equity and quality. But today, in all of that, as I heard colleagues say, Cortland Cox, that all of that was necessary, very necessary, what happened then, and the victories that were won. But it wasn't sufficient. It was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. And today we find ourselves in a similar such fight around the same issues, equity in quality public education. There's even a national movement. It's very much alive here in Mississippi, but it's even national to privatize and to minimize public education. And through vouchers, charters, and choice initiatives that sound so innocuous, but they are aimed at creating a special class of that are entitled to education, not opening it up for everybody. Well, we also face even the Voting Rights Act of 1965 being stripped of some of its most important enforcement tools. In Mississippi, we have to have ID now to vote. And the ID system is getting more and more strenuous. And a student, for instance, a college student ID is not sufficient. It's going to have to be a state issued ID in order to vote. Also, there is the area of economic development and the right of wages. Mississippi is still promotes itself as a low, cheap labor state, and jobs that may be in other places may pay $20 an hour, but in Mississippi they pay $7 to $10 an hour. So Mississippi promotes itself as a cheap labor state now. In addition to that, healthcare. Out of 1965, the work that was done pre-1965 came what we know as Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid is for poor people, low income people. And would you believe that Mississippi refused to accept Medicaid with the poorest health outcomes in the country in the 1960s? They said, the state of Mississippi said, we don't need Medicaid. And it wasn't until, even though it was issued in 1965, Mississippi didn't accept it until 1969, and that was by force and constant resistance. And today, there's an initiative called the Affordable Health Care Act. And would you believe that as long as the Affordable Health Care Act has been out today, that Mississippi still hasn't accepted the Affordable Health Care Act and still has some of the lowest health outcomes in the country? So the fight then brought all of these things about, and it was necessary to do that, but we still find them today not being sufficient. And so today we are active and engaged on every front to bring about, to make it more sufficient.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I didn't know some of that. That's really wonderful context to have. Not wonderful that we're fighting these fights, but glad to have you and the many other activists keeping that up. I'm going to go back a little bit. We're kind of flip-flopping between past and present. But I want to ask you, Mr. Person, how did you go from Freedom Rides to the Marine Corps? We talked a little bit yesterday about how, you know, everyone goes in different directions, and I would love to hear what that process was like for you.
Well, after the men who attacked us in Birmingham were identified and they were brought to trial, and we spent 2 weeks in Birmingham and Montgomery in a trial, and of course they were all exonerated. I was very despondent, and I went home, and my mother saw how it had affected me, and she says to me, she says, "Tony, you would be safer in the Army than saying in the civil rights movement." And because I hadn't told her the complete truth when I joined the Freedom Rides, I've deferred to her. And I guess she was right, because after 61, almost every year thereafter, someone was killed in the civil rights movement. I didn't abandon the movement because a lot of my friends were involved in Freedom Summer, but it was a situation where you had to participate at various levels, and I've never left the movement. It's just a matter of my role and how I played. As I've got older, I was able to financially support a lot of groups and things. So you did what you had to do, and it's encouraging to know that, to see the young people involved today, and it brings back a lot of wonderful memories, because I know that enthusiasm is what makes the difference. And right now, I'm involved with the group. Well, when George Floyd was killed, I was so upset. I called my friend in Anderson, Pete Conroy, and I says, you know, we know how to conduct demonstrations. We know how to do it peacefully, and we know how to do it nonviolently. And out of that group, we've been meeting now for over 3 years. We have a group called the Freedom Riders Training Institute. And what it is that we have developed a curriculum where we can train police officers from these senseless killings, to train students how to conduct a march or a demonstration, to train educators and also first responders. So that's where my energy goes today, because it's so needed. We, like last week, we had the senseless murder and no one can make sense of those things. So it has to come at a different level, and hopefully we can ally with your group and we can expand the point to that the nation know that there is help and these things need not happen. We can do better than that, and we will do better than that, but we have to work together.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because what we keep bringing up in this summit and beyond is that there's so much that we can take from Freedom Summer and from the history of the civil rights movement, these incredibly effective organizing tactics and protest and nonviolence that we can continue implementing today on many of the same fights and the new fights that have come up over the decades. And we really want to harness that and equip our young people now who are leading. And we see that every day. They're hungry for it, but drawing those connections so that it's really one fight. And that's why I'm so grateful to get the chance to talk to both of you. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you both about. Many of the people in this room right now are young organizers themselves or people who work with young organizers. So what lessons would you want them and the many other activists out there to take from the civil rights movement? And this is for both of you.
Okay. From my point of view, I let young people know that they have the ability to change the world. Sometimes they're doubtful, they're upset, they want to see change happen, and they don't really know how to go about it. And I'm saying we have a model you can follow. The things that we did, I think that are right. We had a dress code. We took care of all the people in the march. We didn't do anything at night because that's under the cover of darkness. Anything can and will happen. Uh, and we were well informed. And the idea is that everyone needs to know what's going on. When they see you in the street, they need to know, why are they out there? They need to know why you're out there. And also you must articulate and define your movement. I think that sometimes we get caught up in the rapture of wanting to do something and say we're demonstrating to the wrong group. And like I think that happened a lot when the Israelis and the Palestinians have this problem. I think everybody's each group was demonstrating against another group. And I'm saying there's one group that did nobody demonstrated who should have been the target of all the demonstrations nationwide. And I think they would have got more success had they done that than these splinter groups all over the country at the various universities. So, it's just like, but you have to be able to have people to talk to and to share your ideas and to find out where the pulse is. Also, you have people you could reach. We had the numbers. Dr. King, he had the president and the Justice Department numbers. You need to talk to people who can make changes. You don't need to be talking to somebody going to pass the buck, pass your information around. You need to get to the source of your information. You need to talk to someone who can make decisions. Why should I call you and we're going to play phone tag for the next half hour when I got stuff that has to be done? Simple as that.
Thank you. Mr. Figures, anything to add to that, or would love to hear your perspective on this?
And I think Mr. Persons summed it up in the same way that now people are applauding the military veterans of World War II, like Medgar Evers and others, that kind of set the stage for this movement to begin. I think in the future, when history is appropriately written, that people are going to be applauding the civil rights veterans, the veterans of Vietnam and the Gulf Wars, and their participation in it. They don't get even now, World War II veterans don't get all of the accolades that's due them, but they added discipline. Here's something else, if you would allow me. In Mississippi, the Freedom Rides were sponsored by the Congress, as you said, the Congress of Racial Equality. And so that was a national organization. And you heard Mr. Person say that they were well vetted in order to participate. And then the NAACP had been operating in Mississippi since 1918, and it had created a strategic infrastructure. So when the Freedom Riders got to Jackson, after all that had happened in Alabama, when they got to Jackson, they were taken to Parchment. But it was because of the infrastructure of the NAACP that raised their bond and got it in such a way that they didn't really, the trauma, the danger was minimized because there was an on-the-ground infrastructure. But then you had the youthful engagement of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And you had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the wisdom of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In Mississippi, those 4 national organizations and about 70 or more local to Mississippi organizations like the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, like the Progressive Voting League of Mississippi, like the Mississippi Religious Leadership Conference. These organizations came together, 4 national organizations and over 70 local indigenous organizations, and formed, guess what, another organization called the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO. And COFO was able to coordinate, was set up to coordinate everybody's effort, where everybody would know what everybody else was doing, when, where, and to what extent. So just like Mr. Parson said, that if you were going to be out, then you call in. It wasn't like we got now, but it was 8 Watts lines. You call in and report. You remember that, don't you?
Yeah.
You call in and report where you are and where you're going and your estimated time of arrival. And if you didn't arrive at your destination on time to make the call saying you here, then they knew something was wrong. So in the case of the 3 young men that were murdered here in Mississippi, the people at the COFO Command Center, if you will, knew right away within a series of an hour that something bad had happened. And they knew that because they had set up the infrastructure, the coordination. Coordination is so vital, so strategic. We're celebrating 60 years since Freedom Summer, but where did those 1,000 volunteers that came to Mississippi, where did they stay? They didn't stay in hotels. They stayed in the homes of people in Mississippi. And it was dangerous for them to do that, but the people opened their doors and let strangers come in and stay for that summer. And what work did they do? Well, Mississippi had a subjective literacy test that it administered in order to vote. And they actually taught people literacy skills so that they would have the confidence to even take the test. Now, bear in mind, Mississippi still wasn't passing them because the test was subjective. But people had to have the presence of mind that I could do this. And it was that training, and they call it freedom schools. But that was the work of freedom workers to work in freedom schools and provide people with literacy skills so that they would have the confidence to even face Mississippi. Mississippi was tough though. But all of that is so vitally important. Coordination and planning and preparation. And thank you, Mr. Parsons, for being able to contribute that, pass on to others what was passed on to you, to this great movement of ours.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that thanks. I think about that a lot as we work with our ambassadors and our young people. There was it was so incredibly coordinated and so well organized. And I think sometimes people find it hard to imagine how we could do that now, or if we could do that now. And I think we see, bits and pieces of it. We do have some very coordinated movements happening, but I think, as with anything, you look back at a movement and it feels like a lot of people feel like, well, the circumstances are so different now. So I guess I would love to hear any thoughts or reassurance you each have for young people who feel like we can't pull off such a successful movement. What do you see right now that echoes the civil rights movement, and what hope do you see in young people's movements today?
I think that you need open forums because the attack on education, our kids and young people are not learning a lot of the things that they need to know. I've been asking a very simple question, and I haven't got an answer yet, but I think it's a key to parts of the problem of not of our educational system, but also that they're learning. And my question is this: why do African Americans' complexion run from as dark as mine to as fair as yours? And when I hear the answers from the young people, they miss the point. And I think because they miss the point, is because they have not been taught the point. And I just think that uh, you can't get it totally from the news media because it depends on who you watch, to what version of truth you're going to hear. So it becomes a problem with sifting the truth from the crap that's out there. And I pity the kids because they have to make a choice. For us, it wasn't that difficult because we had a civics and they taught us how this country functioned and they taught us how the government works. So when someone makes a stupid pronunciation about something, it's not true because you know the facts. But see, now everything is so confusing, and I pity the young people because you have to wade through all the different opinions and the all uh, the all the super smart people who's supposed to be out there to help enlighten us. And for them, they've got to grapple for the truth. And maybe if we do nothing else, but if we could eliminate a lot of that and make it easier for them to learn and to get together their facts so they can be factual and they can make decisions. Because sometimes, unfortunately, we make decisions based on improper information.
And I agree wholeheartedly with that. Information is so vital, so strategic. Mr. Parsons mentioned earlier about the research that had been done leading up to the Freedom Rides. That can you imagine that there was a group of people studying the best approach? And then I mentioned freedom schools, literacy initiatives that brought people up to date and in tune with what it was like in the rest of the world. Now, along with Freedom Summer, now this is going to veer off a little bit, but indulge me if you will. Just and I thought about it when Mr. Parsons was talking about what happened in Atlanta. here's something else that happened. So this is August. So this is August 1st. So I think on August the 4th, they found the bodies, the remains of those 3 young men that had been murdered by the state of Mississippi in June. And even though Mississippi furnished the Mississippians and the world with the narrative that, oh, ain't nothing happened to them, they in on the beach somewhere in the Caribbean, laughing at us. But the fact was that they were murdered, and their remains had been hidden. And by August the 4th, they found the remains of those young people. And Miss Ella Baker came to Jackson on August the 6th and spoke to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegates, which is a story within itself. Before they went later in August to challenge the segregated all-white Mississippi Democratic Party in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And among her speech, she said other things, but she said this important thing: until the killing of Black men, Black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Now, we hear about what happened in Atlantic City, New Jersey, at the National Democratic Convention in 1964, when Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, a woman from Mississippi with merely an 8th grade education, gets a chance to speak, and it's preempted. It was going to be aired live, but it was aired later than live. But the whole country heard her and saw this lady from Ruleville, Mississippi, and Mrs. Hamer became, young folks say now, blew up, because she was aired on all 3 of the stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and people saw and heard her remarks. And she became the most popular woman in the country based on those remarks. So popular until, then this is what I wanted to get to. I'm a narrative person now. In December, a fella in New York City named Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X had formed another United type organization similar to COFO called the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And he expressed that he wanted to work with everybody that toward making a better life and a fair deal for the people on earth. He expressed that. And so he invited Mrs. Hamer to come and speak. And then, but Mrs. Hamer didn't just come alone. She brought the Freedom Singers, if you will. And they sung a song called Oginga Odinga of Kenya. And in that song, it talked about the liberation struggle that had been going on in Kenya, when Kenya, the people of Kenya and the Mau Mau were overthrowing British colonialism in order to self-govern. And of course, Jomo Kenyatta became the president of Kenya 2 weeks before she went to New York and spoke with Malcolm X. But this song so compelled Malcolm X, and a year or so before that, he had said, in a revolution, you don't be singing, you too busy swinging. But that particular song so moved him until he spoke 25 minutes introducing Mrs. Hamer to the people in New York through that song. So every genre, every area is important, what people do. And I often say, or sometimes get the opportunity to say, that our struggle has not been just by big names and big organizations. It's been just ordinary people doing what they could with what they had, where they were. If they couldn't do anything but sing, they sung. And the songs and the music type resonated and had an impact on people. So we in now have to be aware of that. And the teaching of these institutes like you're running, Ms. Smith, that is through this foundation, that is so vital, so necessary. We can't get too much of it. And I think that certain people, certain entities know that. They're trying to starve out the transfer of information, and you are lifting up the transfer of information, seeing how vital it is and how important and how strategic it is to share information with people so that they could make decisions necessary. In a democracy, a tyrant can be elected, but an informed people can overthrow tyranny. You know, the majority of the people can vote for a tyrant, but if people are informed, they can prevent tyranny from ever happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on the note of, one of the things you were just saying about keeping this flow of information going and resisting the efforts to suppress this information, I want to elevate a comment in the chat. And I'm seeing we have a warning. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll wrap up shortly. But Dr. Henderson, who is a high school teacher in Mississippi, who we actually got to come to his class virtually and share about the legacy of Freedom Summer. He shared that it's an increasing struggle to get his students motivated to learn about their history and other people's history, because they don't live a lot of the experiences covered. And you can see this comment in the chat, but I think this is a great point to share, a great perspective from Dr. Henderson. I'm curious, Mr. Person, or if either of you have if this resonates with you, or if you have any advice for a high school teacher and other folks who are feeling this struggle of motivating young people to know this history.
I was hoping he would speak, Ms. Smith.
Mr. Person, do you have anything you want to add here, or?
Not at this time.
Well,
A bit of a loaded question.
He'll yield to me. I'll work you through this one. I'm reminded of a person that went to Lanier High School right here in Jackson, not far from where I'm sitting right now. The person's name is Lerone Bennett. You may have heard of him. Yeah. Lerone Bennett graduated Lanier, and as you did, went to Morehouse College. And by 1949, he graduated from Morehouse, and he started working for the Atlanta Constitution Journal, a newspaper there. He was majored in history, but he was also a gifted journalist. And then later, by the early 1950s, he went to become associate editor of Jet magazine in Chicago. And from there to editor of Ebony magazine. Now, in the course of Lerone Bennett's career, he wrote 9 books. He was the first person to recognize the genius of Martin Luther King. And he wrote What Manner of Man?
A man. Yeah.
And but his most popular book out of the 9 books was a book called Before the Mayflower. And but his last book was Forced into Glory. And Forced into Glory is a book about Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people are misinformed that Abraham Lincoln actually caused the demise of enslavement in the Civil War because he was president of the United States. But the actual truth is, or what's not told, is that the self-emancipated Africans that deliberately chose to fight with the United States Army as opposed to the Confederate States Army were the cause of the United States Army being victorious over the Confederate States Army. So, but in that book, there's a foreword, and it's only about 2 sentences long. And in that foreword, he talks about the importance of teachers, Professor Henderson, and he says this, that I want to take this opportunity to thank the teachers that I had at Lanier High School in Jackson, Mississippi, and Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And he names them for their ability to take what had been white history and turn it inside out like a glove and make it dance across the imagination of my mind. Now that's what he says in the foreword of Forced into Glory. But the story doesn't end there. Another teacher in Waterloo, Iowa, picks up Before the Mayflower and passes it on to a group of 8th graders who had never taken Black history or Negro history or African history course before in their lives. And a little girl, a little 8th grade girl, reads 51 pages of Before the Mayflower. In those first 51 pages impacts the work that she's going to do the rest of her life. The little girl was Nicole Hannah Jones. Her work was the 1619 Project, which went on to win her a Pulitzer Prize and change the thinking of the world around who did what and to what extent and how things began.
Thank you so much for that.
Teachers are important. Information is important.
Absolutely. And you all probably saw the pop-up that our breakout rooms are about to close. So in the 15 seconds, I just want to say thank you so much to Mr. Person and Mr. Figures. This has been incredibly powerful, and I'm so grateful to have shared this space with you.
Thank you.
You guys are national treasures, man.